Big hello and welcome to this week's Type 1 Thursday with me, Hanna Boëthius. I am one of the co-founders of the Low Carb Universe, where this stuff takes place, of course, on all our social media. So today is, of course, episode, I think, 4 of the Low Carb Universe's Type 1 Thursdays, which is, of course, ahead of our first ever and the world's first ever a low carb event for diabetes, all kinds of diabetes. And this will take place in June in just outside Stockholm, Sweden. I'm very excited to welcome you all to the gorgeous place of Stockholm, Sweden. At midsummer, we will have of course, a feast, a midsummer feast, and we're very happy to welcome you there and can't wait to celebrate with you. So today will be, as I have already announced in a couple of places, today will be about Type 1 stories. I will also share my own, but if you have time during me yapping over here, why don't you type a little bit about your Type 1 story in the comments, and I get the pleasure and joy of reading it either a little bit later during this live or then afterwards. And I promise I will get back to every single one of you. So that's great. But let's start with, a Type 1 story, because everyone loves a good Type 1 story, right? Anyway, and I'll start with my own, because that's one, of course, that I know. So I was diagnosed many moons ago, not quite that bad, but I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old. And this was in 1985, and yes, you're welcome to do the maths. And I am I was very young. So of course I didn't understand quite what was going on at that time. I still sometimes don't, but that's one of the joys and passions and the little fun furly twins with the Type 1 diabetes that it always keeps you on your toes. Whether you are super controlled or whether you're not, it will always keep you on your toes. Anyway, back to my story. I was 2 years old when I was diagnosed. This was the 80s, of course, the height of the low-fat era. And my parents got to meet all of the knowing or less knowing health professionals. And of course, they quickly diagnosed me with Type 1 diabetes when my mom, after a couple of days, when my mom realized that I wasn't quite myself, albeit I was only 2 years old, and I was tired and I fell asleep everywhere, and I went to the bathroom a lot, and I drank a lot, and all of these things that just signs that there was something off with me, or something was very weird. And so my mom brought me to the hospital, and a doctor diagnosed me very quickly with Type 1 diabetes. It's not a difficult test. It requires a bit of blood and a bit of patience, but that's about it. So it's not a difficult thing to diagnose once, of course, you understand that those are the symptoms, because that is one of the things that is so dangerous with the onset of Type 1 diabetes, because it's so alike the common cold or an influenza or a stomach bug or something like that. The symptoms can be very similar, so that's something to watch out for. Of course, at this point, my parents got the advice that, eat 60% of carbs with every meal, and have skimmed milk to all meals, because that gives you bonus points. And of course, for dessert, have a piece of fruit, because that gives you even more bonus points in this grand scheme of the food pyramid. I may have later realized that this might not be the best way to help treat Type 1 diabetes, but I will get to that. That features later in my story. Anyway, my memories from being diagnosed are actually not many. So actually quite recently, I took the opportunity to ask my parents how it all went down. Apparently, I was not in diabetic ketoacidosis yet. So no DKA, I wasn't diagnosed in it. I had my turns with that later, but I will also get to that later in my story. And my memories from then is basically, I remember that there was a huge cupboard where I could pick out my own pajamas. And there was this doll that I really, really loved in the playroom that I was so sad that I wasn't allowed to bring home. I also remember quite vividly how I pulled out the feeding tubes they put down my nose. I just remember doing it. I don't remember feeling it or anything. But so it was, of course, this was a huge thing. This was a very traumatic experience for me as a child, although I didn't understand what was going on. I don't remember the shots. I don't remember the pokes and pricks and finger sticks and everything. But it is quite interesting to see how far diabetes technology has gotten from 1985 when I was diagnosed, and we had, I think it just about had plastic syringes and not the glass ones that you had to boil to sterilize. We just about had, and the blood sugar meter was sort of like that big. It was quite big, and it took forever to figure out. At least we had the home testing kit, so that was not a big thing. Of course, growing up with something like type 1, it's a challenge every single day of my life. Still is, always will be, but of course there are ways of making it easier on myself or and stuff like that. So growing up, my parents tried to make it make it as normal as possible for me, make my upbringing as normal as possible. And of course there was a bit of candy, and there was a bit of, stuff like that, because we just simply then didn't know better. Of course, not in the same broad spectrum as it is today for kids, and they have candy all the time and everything. I think we had Saturday candy even. And but what we didn't realize then was, of course, that all carbs also turn into sugar in the body and stressed my little tiny body at the age of 2 and onwards unnecessarily. I have realized in hindsight, with all these carbs. And carbs are, of course, in everything that's so-called healthy, all the whole grains, in bread, in rice, potatoes, pasta, all of these things that were considered healthy then, and still are to a certain extent. And I was just hearing from someone who's been newly diagnosed today that the advice is still the same. It is still the same to eat 60% of carbs, margarine, and low-fat milk, and all of these fake products that are not doing anyone good, and especially not a type 1 diabetic. Starting school was also, of course, a challenge. I wanted to be, I had to go off and have my midday snack, and I had to do all these extra things, and I had to go to the doctors and all of this stuff, which of course set me apart from everyone else, which is not entirely desirable. And also, of course, because I had to take so much insulin, I also gained weight, of course, which was not so fun. I was bullied, and I was called nasty names, and nothing that I want to repeat out loud or even in my head. But I was not one of my peers. I was quite clearly someone who was different. And then when I was 9, I was actually quite lucky, are you allowed to say that? I was quite lucky that another girl in my grade also got the diagnosis of type 1, because we were living in Finland at the time, and Finland and Sweden have the highest rate of type 1 children. So it wasn't unimaginable that 2 girls in the same class would have the same, quite rare globally, disease. But this is what happened, and I finally had someone to have my afternoon snacks with, and just experience school with from that kind of a perspective. And then, of course, teenage years came. I went berserk, or actually my body went berserk. All the hormones in my body just went bing, 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 and trying to control that with tons of insulin and tons of carbs at the same time. You know how we went through the one in the first episode, the law of small numbers, with the little arrow. Of course, lots of carbs require lots of insulin, and the margin of error is huge. Whereas if you eat less sugar, and carbs, you will of course need less amounts of insulin to cover that. And then of course you will have a less margin of error. Anyway, teenage years hit, everything went berserk, and I did not fare very well with that at all. Instead of keep trying, I actually, on and off, actually completely gave up on my own care. I did not take insulin as I was supposed to. I did not measure my blood sugar. I did not eat as I was supposed to, not even the healthy whole grains and stuff. I just went completely off the rails. This was, of course, not a great idea at all, because this landed me in hospitals for different reasons. Either my blood sugar was too high and I had ketoacidosis, or my blood sugar was too low and they had to pick me up from, for example, the main station right after we had moved here to Zurich. And I woke up with 2 ambulance guys over me wondering what had happened, but it turned out that my blood sugar had crashed. It was way too low and I had collapsed at the train station. Traumatic experiences, definitely for anyone, but especially for me, who was already ashamed of the diagnosis, ashamed of not being able to take care of myself, ashamed of not being able to control my blood sugar, even though I did everything by the book. I ate, not at that point, but previous to that, I ate the way I should, I took the insulin that I should, and it didn't work. So my conclusion was, why bother? Why bother at all? And so I did give up for a good couple of years. Sporadically, I would get a little boost to start going again, but most often I did not take care of myself as I should. I probably had some sort of a borderline diabulimia, which is, of course, when you avoid taking insulin. So in order to lose weight, as I had been quite the chubby kid. But that was never formally diagnosed. This is just something that I'm thinking of that it may have been afterwards. And it was tough. It really was tough. And as I said, occasionally I would have a little spur of inspirational moment and keep going and start again. And every time I tumbled on my face and I failed. I failed miserably because, of course, I had the completely wrong advice. I was following exactly the wrong advice for me. I know that for many type 1s, a high carb diet works beautifully and they can cover it well with insulin and they get their straight CGM curves and everything. But remember, at that time, like this is 20 years ago, CGMs weren't quite that widely spread, nor were blood sugar meters. Nor insulin pumps. Blood sugar meters, absolutely, but they were big and bulky and took a lot of space and time. So I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have the information. I didn't have anything like that. And frankly, I wasn't interested either to find out a better way, because why bother back then? After a while, of course, I went to university, same thing there, sporadically. I tried to take control, failing miserably every time. And then after university, I met my boyfriend, which is now boyfriend, now husband. And he really became my rock in all of this. A few years into our relationship, I really started giving 2 rat's asses about my diabetes, because of course I wanted to be healthy and happy and in good spirits for my future, because up until then my future had not really crossed my mind. I was living for the day, and I'm managing today, or I'm alive today, and tomorrow doesn't matter. But that's of course the short way to think about it, and not quite the preferred way maybe, or the suggested way of thinking about it. So he really became my rock in finding my path and my way with diabetes. And of course, I started taking better care of myself, failing again, starting again, failing again, starting again, failing again. And this went on for a good couple of years. It actually took me 26 years of being type 1 diabetic, having the diagnosis, until I realized that what the F am I doing with my life? This is not sustainable. I was afraid at that point that I wouldn't see my 30th birthday because I was so drained. My body was taking beating after beating after beating after beating, and I just couldn't take it for another second to try to keep this up with the same tools as I had been using so far. Of course, this is where the Einstein quote comes in really handily. If you keep making the same mistakes and expecting different outcomes, you are an idiot, or something like that. But that is a favorite, and that is really applicable to me at that time. I was studying at the time to become a nutrition coach, which I'm very, very happy I did, because my teacher was fantastic. And he single-handedly saved my life, because we were talking about insulin and carbs and how that all works in the body, and how the body reacts to carbs and how it digests it and all of this stuff. And he points me out in front of my whole class and all my classmates, and he's like, well, you know, Hanna, you're not even producing insulin. If I were you, I would really think twice what I put in my mouth. And that, my dear friends, became my aha moment. And I was gobsmacked. I was like, what? How can they have lied to me for so long? Was it a lie? Did they know the whole time? I got angry. I got upset. I got so infuriated, just because no one, during my 26 years of being type 1, no one had bothered telling me that, hey, Hanna, there's another way. Make this easier on yourself. You don't have to struggle. And that was the whole thing. That's what I had been looking for. All these ups and downs and ins and outs and trials and errors and trials and tribulations. All I had been looking for was, Hanna, it doesn't have to be that difficult. Make it easy for yourself. And so I started. The next day I started, because autoimmunity, which is type 1, is an autoimmune disease, and gluten does not go very well together. It can trigger, and it can be all kinds of nastiness in your body. So after that day, I started cutting out everything with gluten. To that also belongs, of course, that my father has celiac disease. So in case it would be hereditary, I would rather just nip it in the bud and get rid of it straight away. So I started with that, and then I did it step by step, as I have explained in my How episode, How to Go Low Carb with type 1. I did it step by step. First all the gluten, then all the grains, then all the sort of root vegetables, and all of this in different constellations. I started off with a very liberal paleo approach, and I am now down at a very much ketogenic way of eating, and it is the way that suits me the most. That doesn't mean that it might suit you the best, but it suits me the best, and I can never actually look back, because this is something that has really saved and very much in a positive manner changed my life. So even then, you know, my A1C was sort of in the double digits. About 10 years ago, let's put it that way. About 10 years ago, my A1C was in the double digits, and it was terrible. I felt awful. And that's when I wasn't sure if I was going to see my 30th birthday at all. And then slowly it started coming down, milestone after milestone after milestone after milestone, and I kept hitting them. And it was the best feeling ever. I realized after a while, nothing in the food world tastes as good as normal and healthy and beautiful blood sugars and A1C results feel. Nothing is worth it. And I feel that strongly still today. Anyway, so this was, of course, a very, very challenging time, because I had no support. I had no one to help me to do this. I made a lot of errors when I went low carb. ended up in some sticky hypoglycemias, some, I realized that I still had to take insulin even though there were no carbs in the meal and all this stuff. All of that stuff I had to figure out on my own, which you don't have to, because I'm telling you all of this in this series. Anyway, so all of this was very difficult, but in addition to the better blood sugars, the better A1C results, the more positive endocrinologist visits, who knew that those could be positive, right? I also managed to get rid of a lot of medication that I was on for other things like high blood pressure and all of these things. I could get off of many of them. And also, of course, I could lower my insulin dosages. This is, of course, not the holy grail of diabetes management, to lower your insulin dosages, but it is quite beneficial in many, many ways, and that is something I will take up in another episode. But for now, I just wanted to mention that on my high carb days, when I was really trying, I was on about 100 units of insulin a day. For a tiny, relatively tiny little woman, that's a lot of insulin that just is not absorbed by the body, that's not recognized by the body, which is a lot of insulin resistance. And I do also, this is my second assumption, I do assume that I had a little bit of double diabetes back then, much thanks to my clogged liver and carb addiction. Anyway, and so today I take about 20 to 25 units a day, which is then a reduction of 75 to 80% from my highest to now this isn't my lowest, but it is in the lower ranges. So that is definitely a good positive thing, because again, the margin of error, small dosages, small carbs, small margins of error. A lot of carbs, 100 units of insulin a day, you have a lot of errors, and that's when you fall down at the train station in insulin shock. Yeah, great times. Anyway, so I went from feeling unsupported completely, and I've cried about this a lot, feeling unsupported, feeling helpless, feeling like I wouldn't face a major birthday that a lot of people do take almost for granted. But that is one thing that I have learned throughout my journey, that life is definitely not to be taken for granted at all. And I have to appreciate every day. And I try so much to do that. But anyway, and so I've gone from this insecure, unsure, unsupported, hopeless little type 1 who didn't know how to take care of herself to the complete opposite at this point. And I want to say at this point that this is, of course, not the end of my journey, and this is not the end of my journey with health, because this is an ever-going process. But I have come to sort of the right side for me, and then that there are still tons of tweaks and twists and fun stuff to be done. That is a completely different thing. I'm not done. I will never be done, but I will keep trying every darn day of my life. And it's become very, very clear to me that managing diabetes is a very holistic thing, because at the hospital and from most healthcare practitioners, you hear that it is food, insulin, and exercise that helps you manage diabetes. And of course, eat whatever you want and just take insulin for it, which is, I've said it before and I will say it again, it is about the worst diabetes advice ever that has ever been given anywhere. So yes, it is not good, but it goes so much further beyond that. No healthcare professional has taken up this whole thing with mind-body connection with me, or the mental aspects of living with diabetes, or a chronic disease at all. This is all this stuff that I've had to figure out on my own. And how important, for example, hydration is in managing diabetes. Yes, drink this much, exercise this much, take this much medication, and eat this. Yeah, but that's not really the full picture, though, is it? Also, supplements, the role of supplements, how much that can change and how much that can do for a better management. Also, stress management, of course, that is a huge blood sugar killer. And this is something, and you know, the list goes on. You need to have your routine. You need to find what works best for you in terms of all of these tiny things that make up the big holistic diabetes management picture. So yes, I'm not saying that my journey and my choices are the best for anyone else out there, not for you, not for your friends, not for anyone, but if I can at least just give one little tweak of hope for you in telling my story, then this is what I will be doing. Thank you so much for watching all this way. I will see you next week at Type 1 Thursday by the Low Carb Universe. Take care.